don't agree that you did the wrong version. What you did was intentionally libel somebody else and engage in acts of deception as a form of persecution as well as torture. I found the book some time ago and it had some information in it that I did not know about the history of the United States. It's not my place to make a speculation about somebody else's relationship with particular cultural belonging, especially if they've never done anything to, shall we say, come out to me about it, right? But let's just say it let me know that there was a history of a specific family that these days is associated with having one particular kind of cultural association. It was not the same at the beginning of the 1800s and even later when they were dealing with the ramifications of having supported the war effort during the Revolutionary War. In the course of reading that book, I found information about a rabbi who had been involved in a controversy because he published a public repudiation of a sermon that had been provided by another rabbi. This other rabbi was a proponent of slavery, and he gave a sermon and had a transcript of it, and then others had put it into circulation. And when they did, the rabbi that I encountered in this book had written criticism of it. So I tried to look it up online. But what happened was somebody was doing something completely ridiculous where they swapped out the rabbis. So the rabbi that wrote the original sermon was swapped out with the rabbi who wrote the admonition. And if you hadn't seen an actual paper book, that by the way itself is over, if I'm not mistaken, 40 or 50 years old, that had the original information in it, you would have thought that the rabbi who was pro-slavery wrote the admonition, and the rabbi who wrote the admonition was the one who wrote the original sermon that was pro-slavery. And the implication was, well, do you want them to acknowledge you were the author of the original or not? Or do you want them to acknowledge you as being the one that was repudiating slavery? Now, this was done on a digital website. This was done recently. There's a video on my YouTube feed where I recount that. I considered it, regardless of what you identified my religious perspective to be or would accept, to be an act of persecution, to be a hate crime, but to also be libel. And depending upon what the purpose was in doing that, it could potentially be evidentiary of other crimes. There's this book, I've said it before, it's a book produced by the Library of Congress. On another page, this is what it says. As Rabbi of Congregation B'nai Jesurun, the Reverend Dr. Morris J. Raffle, 1798 to 1868, one of New York's more prominent clergymen, had gained renown as an orator, distinction as being the first rabbi to open the session of the House of Representatives with a prayer, and notoriety for his sermon, The Bible View of Slavery, which was printed, reprinted, and widely distributed as a pro-slavery sermon by anti-abolitionist forces. Now, that was understood from my initial encounter with this particular controversy. But this, being the primary source material I have, lets me understand that you have to be very careful when you say things like, well, we did it from the wrong perspective. We did it the wrong way. So you tried to contrive a way to give me a unconstitutional religious test in the course of me attempting to file charges, criminal charges, by the way, with constitutional implications, meaning it's not common law, and wanted to contrive to alter the information as it is for some specific kind of narrativization. Well, this is what the primary source documentation provided to me, which is the manner it seems that you try to make some sort of, I don't know, acknowledgement of having provided evidence. This is what it says next. As Raphael told his congregation when it assembled to mourn the martyred president, he knew Lincoln but slightly. He had met Lincoln only once, but on that single occasion the rabbi had asked a favor of the president, and as Raphael told the congregants, Lincoln had, quote, granted it lovingly because he knew the speaker to be a Jew, because he knew him to be a true servant of the Lord, end quote. The favor granted must have been the rabbi's request that his son be promoted from second lieutenant to first. 40 years later, in 1903, Adolphus S. Solomons of the book publishing firm of Philip and Solomons in Washington, D.C., reminisced that he had helped Rabbi Raphael get an audience with the president where the request was made and granted. Lincoln did even more for Raphael's son-in-law, Captain C.N. Levy. Assigned to the quartermaster department in Washington, Captain Levy undertook as an added task to distribute special food and clothing to Jewish soldiers in the capital's hospitals. On October 9, 1863, a Captain C.M. Levy was court-martialed and dismissed from service for unspecified charges. Apparently appealed to, Lincoln must have responded with his fabled compassion, for on March 1st, 1864, Raphael wrote him thanking him for, quote, the generosity and justice with which you have treated my son-in-law, Captain C.M. Levy, end quote. Now, this is dated a year after the special order from Major General U.S. Grant ordering the evictions of Jews because of their relationship with trade, right? Because as a class, they were violating every regulation of trade. And here is a soldier distributing special food. You mean food without pork in it? Did he refuse to distribute bacon? Did he refuse to distribute bacon to Jews? Did he refuse to distribute pork to Jews so he was court-martialed? You know, the other thing I learned in the original book was that during the Civil War, rabbis were not by law allowed to be chaplains for the military. You could be a chaplain as long as you weren't a Jewish chaplain. Rabbis weren't allowed to be acknowledged as chaplains during the Civil War. Why? So did you think you were going to what? Take me out of contention as an equal that was admonishing you for violating the Constitution and make me the child whose charity refused to distribute your poisoned food products? Who refused to subject other people to acts of religious persecution and ritual shaming because you wanted to say it was your constitutional right to worship in order to subject another group of people at worship to persecutorial processes. You got it wrong. In this case, it would seem I'm the book publisher and you got caught plagiarizing.